I love an unsolved mystery, especially a murder mystery, and judging by the number of people willing to sit through the audio atrocity that is my Giles Rosby video, so do you. So let's look at one of the most high profile of Westeros' unsolved murders, the time someone killed a king and got away with it. That king was Maegor, so fair enough, but still, justice must be done, so let's ask the question, who killed Maegor the Cruel? Now, a quick disclaimer. This question is deliberately left unanswered because the real answer is the one that most people in Westeros believe, that he was killed by the Iron Throne. Of course, that can't be what actually, literally happened, but metaphorically speaking, whoever killed Maegor did it because he was a horrendous tyrant, so the symbol of the throne killing him is the important bit for the story, and is what actually matters when other characters in the series think about it. But, as I've said before, we're not here for peel paragraphs or literary analysis, we're here to indulge in armchair detective work. So let's start by stating the facts of the case. Maegor the Cruel's death comes as his rule is falling apart around him. Most of his wives have died or been killed, and he's had several stillborn children that are weird and deformed. Apparently this is what led to his remaining supporters abandoning him, the Faith Rebellion ramping up and starting to get open support from lords, his hand Edwell Celtigar abandoning him, Rhaena flying off on Dreamfire with her daughter Arya, and most of all, Storm's End turning against him and proclaiming Jaehaerys as king. Maegor calls his few allies and holds a war council with them long into the night in the throne room in the Red Keep. Around 3 in the morning, the lords finally leave to go to sleep, with Lords Rosby and Towers the last to see him. The next morning, just before dawn, his wife Eleanor Costaigne goes in to see him and finds him dead. Now we've set the scene, let's get into what every good murder mystery needs, a list of suspects. Luckily for us, Fire and Blood gives us a healthy batch of names when discussing the death of Maegor, his Kingsguard, Eleanor Costaigne, the throne of course, Maegor himself, or a mysterious person sneaking through the hidden tunnels. Later on, Archmaester Gildane references rumours that Rhaena, the other wife of Maegor, was somehow involved. From the World Book we also get the possibility that one of the Masons of the Red Keep who survived Maegor's purge was the one to sneak in through the secret passages. As with any list of suspects in a murder mystery, there's a distinct possibility that the true culprit isn't actually on it. One glaring omission in the list given by the historians is the lords in the room with him, especially the two who were the last to see him alive, Lord Rosby and Lord Towers. And then the other person we should add is Jaehaerys. It's unlikely he did the deed himself, but as someone who is expressly gearing up to fight his uncle, we must explore the possibility that the killer acted on his orders. We've already spoken about the throne. Metaphorically speaking it killed him, but unless we're getting into magical, mystical territory, it probably isn't literally to blame. We can also probably discount the possibility that he topped himself. I'm going to have to dance around the subject a bit to avoid the YouTube censors, but the manner of Maegor's death seems difficult to ascribe to his own hand. The blades of the Iron Throne apparently get his wrists, fairly believable, but also somehow one manages to go through the back of his neck and out the other side. Gildane proposes that he might have twisted the blades as needed to do himself in, but I'm not sure Maegor has the strength to bend steel. Presumably that line was put in there because Gurm realised it would be a bit odd for the Iron Throne to be designed with a sharp blade at neck height sticking out far enough to kill you. I know it's supposed to be uncomfortable, but that's taking it a bit far. The logistics of Maegor hot-fuzzing himself don't offer the best explanation for his death. The blade through the neck seems more like something a murderer would do to kill Maegor without him being able to cry out and alert anyone, with the wounds on his wrists perhaps caused by him gripping the throne reflexively as the murderer pushed him onto the blade. Then, besides the logistics, there's the motive. Maegor is in a pretty bad spot, but mere hours ago he beheaded one of his loyal lords for daring to suggest he give up. I'm not saying it's impossible he changed his mind, but a stated reason, to not face the indignity and disgrace of defeat in battle, is a little off. After all, what's dignified or graceful about people thinking you were killed by a chair? Normally characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, especially battle-y ones like Maegor, see death in battle as the most dignified way to go out, from Argilac Durandon to Roderick the Ruin to the Blackfish. Then there's the fact that this is the option favoured by the World Book, and while Gildane does not explicitly pick his favourite theory, he does end on this one, which makes it feel like maybe this is the one he believes, and we all know that whichever option is the one presented as the truth in a mystery like this is almost always wrong. If we write off Maegor and his chair as candidates, we're left with actual would-be murderers. Let's take Lords Rosby and Towers first, as they're the last to see Maegor alive. They probably have the means, there's 2 of them, so they could probably overpower him, and they're his allies, so he might not realise what was happening until it was too late. Also, from what we're told, Maegor's loyal lords didn't realise how bad the situation was until this very night, when they got called into the War Council and saw there were no great lords on their side, unless you count Towers himself, who was Lord of Harrenhal. This is important as one of the questions we have to ask is, why kill Maegor now? Rosby and Towers have an answer for that. Up until this point they thought he had a chance of winning. Them being the last to see him alive is suspicious, and the state Maegor's body is found in, pale and with the bleeding having seemingly stopped, and Towers and Rosby by their own admission had the biggest gap between when they could have committed the murder and Eleanor finding his corpse. Lord Towers yields the Red Keep to Jaehaerys when he arrives, and notably is allowed to keep Harrenhal, which could have been payment for services rendered. However, there's a couple of holes in this theory. One is that it requires Rosby and Towers to coordinate, and if the line about them only realising the jig is up in the council meeting is correct, they don't really have much time or privacy to do that in. Also, I don't think Maegor would have been blind to the possibility they might turn on him, so I struggle to imagine how they managed to get close enough to him to do the deed without him suspecting something and at least fighting back and causing a ruckus. The biggest mark against him, though, is what happens after Maegor dies. Yes, Towers bends the knee and gets to keep Harrenhal, but he is also thrown in the Black Cells for a bit and gets some of his lands confiscated. Lord Rosby, meanwhile, does a Socrates and drinks some hemlock. Or at least that's what Fire and Blood says happened. If they did kill Maegor, you might think they'd have milked it a bit more with Jaehaerys, at least behind the scenes, even if they knew he wouldn't be able to publicly condone kingslaying. Towers and Rosby are possibles, but I'm far from convinced. So let's move on to our next suspect, Eleanor Costain. She definitely has a motive to kill Maegor, who killed her husband, sent away her kids, and forcibly married her. She's also the one to discover him, which always puts you under suspicion. Then there's what happens after the death. She ends up joining the faith and going around preaching the doctrine of exceptionalism, a very pro-Jaehaerys thing to do and a real pain in the ass when we're told she just wanted a quiet life with the family she had left. Perhaps Jaehaerys had dirt on her to get her to do it for him, and perhaps that dirt was that she killed Maegor. Alternatively, she might be joining the faith as penance for the crime of kingslaying. In the aftermath of Jaehaerys' ascension, she leaves King's Landing dressed in the robes of a penitent. The trouble with Costain, however, is one of logistics. This line, where the guards say no one entered before she did, implies that the guards were there when she entered, otherwise how would they know? With this in mind, the difference between the short amount of time it would take for Eleanor to notice Maegor was dead and raise the alarm, versus the long time it would take to not just kill him but wait for all his blood to drain out and him to go pale and then raise the alarm, would be noticeable. Also, killing him would likely entail getting herself covered in blood, which is not mentioned, and killing him at all would be physically difficult. Unlike Rosby and Towers, there's only one of her, and she's not described as especially strong, particularly compared to someone like Maegor. Possibly he's asleep when she enters, but sleeping on the Iron Throne sounds like some kind of extreme acupuncture hellscape. Regardless, I think the state of Maegor's corpse and the fact that Eleanor would have had to kill him very quickly to avoid suspicion exclude her from our lineup. Unless, of course, she was working with the guards on the door, who could have covered up any awkward pauses between her entering the room and alerting everyone that the king was dead. And those guards are our next suspects, the Kingsguard. We're told that there were 4 Kingsguard on duty that night, 2 guarding each door to the throne room. Based on process of elimination, 2 having defected to Jaehaerys at this point and 1 being dead, we can identify them as Maladon Moore, Harold Langwood, John Tollett, and Simon Crane. Gildane tells us that if they were the culprits, they would have had to act in concert, because there were 2 on each door. Now, it's not clear which doors Gildane's talking about here. The entrance to the Red Keep is double doors, so is that 2 are on the left, 2 are on the right, so they're all in the same place and would have all needed to be in on it? Or is it referring to the King's door behind the throne, which is mentioned by Tyrion, Cersei, and Jaime in the main series? If it's 2 on the front doors and 2 on this King's door, then it could have been just one pair that did Maegor in, the other 2 remaining oblivious. But is that what Gildane means by the Kingsguard acting in concert? Just 2 of them, not all of them? You'd think that the guards wouldn't all cluster stupidly around one door, leaving the other completely unguarded, but it's also possible that door was added later and didn't exist at this point in time. It's at moments like these that I realise how truly ridiculous this whole exercise I'm engaging in is, So let's just brush that to one side for now, and see what possible combo of Kingsguard could or would have killed their king. I reckon we could rule out at least one, Maladin Moor. Not to be confused with Mandon Moor, the Kingsguard knight in the main series, Maladin's main accomplishments are poorly restraining Cerise Hightower so that she was killed while another Kingsguard, Owen Bush, tried to cut her tongue out, and then delivering Tiana of the Tower to Maegor and standing by as she was executed. Granted, the first one may not have happened at all, Gildain doesn't seem to think so, but Maladin's denial of it actually lines up with the story. The accusation is that Maegor ordered Cerise's death because of a shrewish remark. Shrewish means bad-tempered or aggressively assertive, according to Google. And then Maladin says he didn't kill Cerise, she died of shrewishness. It sounds less like he's disputing the fact of the case, rather that he's blaming Cerise for the situation. Anyway, all this is to say that Maladin is judged guilty of involvement in the deaths of 2 queens, and is executed. If he had been involved in killing Maegor, surely he would have mentioned it? Sure, Jaehaerys might not like the idea of rewarding kingslaying, but if you're going to get executed anyway, you might as well give it a shot. And maybe you could tell him privately, so he doesn't have to publicly acknowledge it, but still give you a let-off. The fact that Maladin is executed seems to weigh against the idea that he was involved. I mean, even just shout it out on the gallows that you were the one who killed Maegor. Something, anything. And judging by his actions and comment on Cerise, he's not exactly a noble knight who would kill Maegor for any reason other than the hope of personal advancement, nor would he willingly accept death as punishment for killing Maegor. In a similar vein, I think we can also probably rule out Harold Langwood. This guy's an old knight who doesn't want to go to the wall after Jaehaerys comes to power, and instead demands a trial by combat, which he loses fairly easily. As with Maladin, there's the question of why kill Maegor and then not use that to keep your life/position in the Kingsguard. And if you say there's honour or oaths involved, remember that these are Maegor's Kingsguard, and they've been supporting his sacrilegious, torturous regime for years at this point. The timing of Maegor's death says to me that it's not an honour thing. It would be mighty convenient if the Kingsguard happened to have a crisis of conscience just as Maegor's regime was falling apart. If they did him in, as with Lords Towers and Rosby, the motive would presumably be to curry favour with Jaehaerys. If you're just going to let him kill you, it defeats the point of killing Maegor in the first place. This leaves Simon Crane and John Tollet, and if we accept that Gildain's Kingsguard acting in concert could mean just 2 of them, these are the 2 that make the most sense. We know literally nothing about them. They are mentioned once, here, where it is said that they accept Jaehaerys' offer of going to the wall. We don't hear about them later when the other 2 Kingsguard, who had already switched sides when Maegor died and so aren't suspects, lead a rebellion at the Night's Watch. So presumably they didn't join that, because if they did, Gildain would presumably have mentioned it. If any of the Kingsguard did it, I would pin it on these 2. But then, having to go to the wall despite having done Jaehaerys a huge solid would be pretty annoying, and you'd think they'd want to extract more concessions. If I basically put someone on the throne by killing his uncle and then he banished me to Hadrian's Wall, I'd be pretty pissed off, and if one of my fellow banishees then proposed a nice jolly jaunt of a rebellion, I'd feel more than a bit tempted to go along. And maybe Tollet and Crane did, but again, you'd think Gildain would have mentioned it. So we can't rule them out, but the combination of their obscurity and the punishment Jaehaerys gives them makes this one not a very satisfying answer. Let's move on to our next suspect then, Rhaena Targaryen. This is a weird one because, as Gildain notes, she's not around for Maegor's death, so this would have to be an agent doing it for her. One odd thing with this, and indeed the story in general, is we're told that before Rhaena runs off, she steals Blackfyre from Maegor's scabbard while he's asleep. So, why not kill him right there and then? Even if she didn't go on to plot to kill him. Maybe Blackfyre's in a different room and there's guards with Maegor, but that's not really how the line reads, and you'd think Rhaena would be in the same room as Maegor, seeing as they're married, and Maegor seems like the kind of guy who would keep his sword nearby even when he's asleep. The only explanation I can come up with is that Rhaena thought she would probably end up executed or at best banished for kinslaying/kingslaying, because Jaehaerys is a goody two-shoes and wouldn't want to anger the faith and might want to get rid of her anyway as she's arrival to the throne, and so on and so on. Another possibility that might be crossing your mind is that Rhaenyra doesn't need to kill Maegor, that his reign is falling apart anyway and Jaehaerys' ascension to the throne is at this point a formality. That's kind of the impression that Fire and Blood gives, that after Maegor's latest batch of dead babies his days were numbered, and everyone was going to abandon him to a side of his enemies, especially Jaehaerys. And certainly that seems the case, the momentum is clearly against Maegor, though not so much that his remaining allies notice it until the last night of his reign. However, that momentum could turn around should Maegor defeat his enemies or push them back underground, And even if Maegor's defeat is likely, that doesn't mean Jaehaerys will necessarily be triumphant, because Maegor still has a dragon. Fire and Blood would have you believe that this time the rebels are guaranteed to win because, as Rogar says, they have dragons too. 3 in fact, as Gyldain helpfully points out. However, this is where dragon maths really kicks into gear, because Maegor has Balerion, the most powerful and largest dragon ever in Westeros. He easily crushed Aegon the Uncrowned and Quicksilver last time around, and Gyldain admits that had Rhaena been there with Dreamfire, it might not have made any difference. Add to that the fact that Maegor has lots of experience fighting on Dragonback, whereas his opponents have none. Also, his enemies and their dragons are very young. None of the dragons are more than 16 years old, and their riders include 14-year-old Jaehaerys and 12-year-old Alysanne. Maegor's cause seems lost in retrospect, but if it comes to a dragon fight, he may actually win. And even if that seems far from certain, it's likely he'd take at least one enemy down with him, a risk that none of his opponents would want to take. So the strongest motive for killing Maegor specifically at the time he is killed is definitely with the Jaehaerys camp. Eleanor Costain definitely has reason to hate him, but has had such reason since day one, so why wait till now? While the Kingsguard and Lords of Rosby Towers might want to get on Jay's good side, but if so, it doesn't work out well for them and they make no attempt to exploit the murder for their own ends. So, Rhaena, Jaehaerys and his crew definitely have the motive. But what about the means? Well, there's a way we can tie in the suspicions about Rhaena having a role with the timing of Maegor's death with a few choice lines. Let's start with one from way back in Game of Thrones, when Cat tells us Maegor vowed that only the blood of the dragon would know the secrets of the Red Keep. Now, this is the only time I can find that this specific idea is mentioned, and it's from Book 1, so take it with a grain of salt, but still. Let's suppose that Maegor really did only ever plan to pass on the secrets to other Targaryens. Presumably this just means his heirs, and he expected to have sons, so he likely wouldn't have told any of his family, who he was constantly fighting. He declares Arya, Rhaena's daughter with Aegon the Uncrowned, as his heir when he gets married to Rhaena, but at that point he still expects to get some sons. It's only when Jane Westling dies, Tyner of the Tower gets executed, and his 2 kids by Westling and Eleanor Costain are born, that the prospect of sons seems unlikely. Gyldain tells us that everyone reckons Maegor's cursed, everyone starts abandoning him, and Jaehaerys rises up. It seems that if Maegor was ever going to decide to let someone know the secrets of the Red Keep, so that they would remain with the Targaryens, now might be a good time. If so, maybe he told his heir, Arya, who might have then told Rhaena. Maybe that was what prompted Rhaena to leave without killing him, because she knew that she could exploit the secret passages to kill him without inflicting herself with the ignominy of kinslaying. In this reading, Rhaena then tells Jaehaerys about the passages in the Red Keep, and he arranges for someone to go and kill Maegor. But hang on, you say, what evidence is there that Jaehaerys or his allies even know about the passages, beyond the conjecture that maybe Rhaena knew and then told him? Well, there's 2 pieces of evidence. One, and the other I consider a smoking gun. To talk about either, we have to talk about the repeated motif of rats in the walls, as a metaphor for people sneaking around in Maegor's back passages. Tyrion thinks about rats in the walls in this context. Varys uses the phrase when talking about Maegor. Littlefinger says he calls Varys' little birds little rats, and alludes to them being in the walls, while Cersei finds literal rats in the walls when doing a spring clean of the Red Keep, but also thinks about Tyrion and Varys as rats in the walls. Applying this to Tyanna of the Tower, who is said to speak with rats and get her information from them, we can take this as a metaphor for either her or her agents sneaking through the secret tunnels. This brings us to the piece of evidence, which is that when Jaehaerys' Regency Council is later on arranging a marriage for Alysanne, she finds out about it. Somehow. Gyldain puts forward some suspects for this skullduggery, and they're believable. Grand Maester Bennifer thinks a servant told her, which is neither here nor there, but Rogar thinks it was Daemon Velaryon, which would fit with Daemon's other behaviour, like refusing to sail against Jaehaerys, standing up to Rogar's coup attempt, and then becoming Jay's first hand. Yet there's another possibility, which Gyldain sniffily describes as legend originating from the small folk, which is that rats in the walls scurried to Alysanne and told her what was going down. Now, that sounds to me like Jaehaerys and Alysanne have a spy network in the earliest years of their reign, and therefore know about the tunnels. Who knows, maybe Alysanne herself was the one who overheard the council discussing her marriage. After all, many of the tunnels are too small for anyone except children to navigate, and there's that whole only the blood of the dragon will know the secrets rubbish. That's not my smoking gun, though. The big evidence is what Jaehaerys does when he returns to King's Landing at the end of his regency. He cleans house, dismissing some of his rubbish councillors like Edwell Celtigar, and replacing the holders of many other lower offices as well. All generally have some importance, though. The Keeper of the Keys, which we don't know what that does, but Littlefinger and Giles Rosby both thought it important to have their guy in the role. The Chief Steward of the Red Keep and his understewards, the Harbour Master of King's Landing, the Warden of the Mint, the King's Justice, the Master at Arms, the Master of Horse, the Kennel Master, and even the Castle Rat Catchers. Now, every other position makes sense to change, with the possible exception of Kennel Master, because all of them have some kind of importance attached to the role. Rat Catchers, though, why would you ever need to change to Rat Catchers? It's thrown onto the end of this list as a sort of, wow, he's really shaking things up, he even swapped out the Rat Catchers. But in universe, why would you do that? It's not as if Rat Catchers know the secret passages of the Red Keep, and therefore you would definitely want all of them to be your hand-picked guys, able to listen in on other people's conversations and carry out clandestine operations if needed. Except, of course, that's cheese in the Dance of the Dragons. A rat catcher who apparently simply by virtue of being a rat catcher knows the passages of the Red Keep. The rats in the walls are spies, and so, it would seem, are the rat catchers. Cersei finds thousands of actual rats in the walls, so the line that rat catchers might have found the passages looking for rats holds some water. Then there's the fact that everyone in the main series seems not to know that much about the passages, or not fully internalise the fact that they're real. This can be traced to the decision during the dance to execute all the rat catchers and replace them with cats, so no one was naturally finding the passages anymore. Jaehaerys changing the rat catchers implies he knows about the passages, and how exactly would he know about them? At this point he's lived most of the last 7 or 8 years outside of King's Landing, and had he known about the tunnels from his young childhood, maybe he could have used that information while in exile to get someone to bump off Maegor earlier. The timeline works best in my head with Rhaena telling Jaehaerys after being told by Arya, who was told by Maegor because everything was starting to fall apart. This also gives another reason for the Targs to do the Arya-Rhaella swap, putting someone with vital and dangerous knowledge somewhere she won't ever have the ability or will to use it. The logistics of the secret passage plan also make more sense than anyone approaching from the doors, seeing as Maegor would likely see them coming. A secret passage could open behind the throne, and the killer could sneak up and then grab him by the head and pull him back onto a spike, with his arms being gashed open from reflexively grabbing the arms of the throne to try to stop his head being pulled backwards. The only question remaining is who was tasked by Jaehaerys, Rhaena and Alysanne with sneaking through the secret passages and killing Maegor. And to be honest, I don't really have an answer for this one. Could have been anyone. Maybe it was a hired assassin, like a faceless man. His allegations that a guy called Septon Moon was killed by a faceless man, but Gildane points out that his death doesn't match their style of killing, so maybe this is a case of rumours getting mixed up. Maybe it was Cheese's granddad, because why not? Maybe it was Jaehaerys himself, or Alysanne. Again, a lot of the passages are so small, only children can fit in them, and only the blood of the dragon and all that. And perhaps Jaehaerys didn't trust anyone else with the knowledge of this particular secret route. But then again, it could really be anyone. Maegor had a lot of enemies. There would have been a lot of people ready to jump at the opportunity to do him in. But whoever it was, they probably did it at the urging of Jaehaerys' camp, with information provided by him, likely sourced from Rhaena, perhaps through Arya, ultimately from Maegor himself. So that in the end, whichever way you slice it, Maegor's death was his own silly fault. The throne killing him representing his ambition and tyranny and lust for power, and the actual logistics being that he was so bad that someone among his family, wives, closest allies and bodyguards ended up doing him in. So that's my take on who killed Maegor the Cruel. Let me know in the comments who you think did it. I look forward to passionate arguments in favour of Alice Rivers, Bran from the future, and of course Maegor's chair. Until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye. And then Maladon says he didn't kill Cerise, she died of shrewishness. She died of shrewishness. There's no way of saying that word. She died of shrewishness. Shrewishness. She died of shrewishness. I think that's about right.